It's always a pleasure to welcome Jennifer Ewbank into the Cipher Brief studio. Jennifer, of course, retired as the Deputy Director of CIA for Digital Innovation, and she's also now a member of the Cyber Initiatives Group, a principal member of that group. Jennifer, thanks so much for being here with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Suzanne. Thanks for the invitation.
It was a bit of I guess, as President Trump called it, a wake up call, a bit of a surprise for a lot of people this week to see this Chinese company release an AI model that it said in the beginning could really rival ChatGPT at a much lower cost. I'm curious, what are the national security implications around something like this? When you hear news like this break, given your experience, what's the first thing you think of?
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. And I appreciate that because in this past week, there's been a lot of focus on, the kind of technology aspects, very important. Of course, the markets have, responded and rebounded, and there's a lot of focus there. But what gets lost in that sometimes is the national security kind of implications. And so, in thinking about this, a few things come to mind first, and there are no answers yet, right? This is still really early days. And, I think analysts will be looking at this for some time. But this is a Chinese company. Chinese companies operate under very specific national security laws in the People's Republic of China. And so, what comes to mind first for me are issues of data privacy and potential espionage. So, there's no way to say at this point, I'm not asserting that, DeepSeek is sharing all the data with the government. But if the government asks, they are obligated. They're compelled to do so. There is no choice and there's no legal process for that. And so, I think people need to keep that in mind as they're looking at whether they're going to use this capability. I certainly would not recommend it for most people in the United States. And we've already seen the U.S. Navy came out very quickly and said, it is banned. It is not allowed for any members of the service to use it. So that comes to mind first. Um, so it being a powerful, kind of frontier model, I think about influence operations, its potential use for that to scale abilities by the ability by bad actors to send influence and messaging to foreign audiences, but also, so if we step back and we think about, okay, this new model trained on data that is acceptable to the Chinese Communist Party, right? That's going to be a certain kind of limited scope. And so does that introduce some kind of ideological bias over time? If this is a model that's used widely in countries around the world, what does that mean about access to information, access to kind of other ways of thinking? I mean, could that over time actually lead to an ideological bias that kind of replicates itself? I don't know. These are just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of talk about security vulnerabilities in R1, the new model. I haven't seen the detailed analysis of that yet, but there is speculation or an assumption that it can be jailbreaked pretty easy. Jailbroken, jailbreak. What's the right term in hacker language? I'm not sure, but the idea being that bad actors could use this open source model for really, really scary things. So, of course, ransomware, that's one. But as we've talked about in other venues, I think at the threat conference last year, for example, there are a lot of other things that an AI model could be used for that are pretty awful. So think about learning how to make improvised explosive devices. Think about biological weapons, all sorts of things that most AI models today are built with safety in mind, and those things are very hard to do. But if you have an open source model that can be easily subjected to jailbreak, then what happens?
Yeah.
Um, and then there's kind of a dual use risk with any kind of AI, any kind of emerging technology generally. So it can be used for good, can be used for evil, and that kind of maybe it amplifies the opportunities for the negative. And then the last one, this is something that I've written about a bit and spoken about at conferences and just with friends. Is really this broader strategic competition between the U.S. and China, and AI is right at the heart of that strategic competition. We tend to think about things like weapons systems and size of our military and how many ships we have, and all those things are really, really important. But digital tech and specifically AI is right at the heart of this competition between kind of two competing views of the world. And so, what are the implications of a surprise development? I think they were calling it a Sputnik moment for for China. What are the implications of that for the strategic competition between the U.S. and the PRC? I think that's interesting, and it maybe will hit a little bit on what has been a bit of U.S. complacency about leadership in AI.
I think that's a great point that you hit on there, Jennifer. And also, I think, understanding just the impact on that market right away was sort of at least one wake up call. On the national security side, there are a lot of private sector companies that are doing a lot of work to support and work with government when it comes to this tech race that you mentioned with China in particular. And I'm wondering, sort of without naming names or anything like that, what's your sense of what their reaction to the news was this week?
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, we saw the market, right? I mean, markets are jittery, and so they respond quickly, and then things kind of recover a bit. But um, I I can't say kind of broadly what impacts were, but I'll give a couple of examples. One company was very interested in the possibility of seeing what this open source model could do for them in a confined environment, not something that would be open to the internet and available for exploitation by bad actors. So kind of interesting. I don't know that I could pursue that, but another like a large company, very I would say influential in AI, um, did not respond with doom and gloom. It was really a more balanced response. And maybe we can kind of pull this thread a little bit on the opportunity space because um, they were philosophical about it. Like there's a wake up call. If there's another way to do business, that's a good thing. And we're putting all this investment. Stargate was announced as well. Just 2 weeks ago. So huge investment in AI infrastructure and energy and data centers and the rest of it. So immediately people think, oh my goodness, was that not necessary? But in fact, maybe that just amplifies what the possible impact of all that's going to be. But anyway, it's a really long way of saying that this one company I was pleased to hear say that no, there could be some positive benefits out of this if we step back a little bit. We don't just think about a market reaction on a specific day.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsecedge.com.
So just kind of in closing then, what do you think the key lessons should be from the national security perspective to the news this week? And then, as you mentioned, details dribbled out. They found out it wasn't exactly the same as ChatGPT. It had been trained against a different model, which kind of rewrote history in terms of some of the things that the US and PRC, China, sees differently. Tiananmen Square, for example, was one thing I saw in the
Yeah,
headlines.
yeah.
What are some of the other just sort of takeaways that you want to leave us with about this in terms of lessons?
I would say a couple things. One, in the opportunity space, maybe it will generate some interesting developments here in the U.S. Focused on cost efficiency of training new frontier models. Certainly, some really interesting work on energy efficiency, which is a huge challenge. It has been, so maybe that opens up new space there. I think it highlights the value of open source in digital tech and how that can be super helpful, and that kind of collaborative effort between companies and between government and companies. Maybe that opens up some opportunity there. But in terms of a national security response, it should encourage, I think, the administration and Congress and others to think about what is the impact of and the role of export controls, and maybe the controls are as they should be, but PRC did demonstrate that they were kind of having that constrained environment actually prompted some creative thinking. And so let's think about how we use export controls. And if we use them, we can't just say, okay, we're done, right? We've controlled this development and we're stopping something, because that's not going to happen. People innovate. I think that it highlights something that's been an issue for the last couple of years. Many people in the U.S. national security community still view the PRC as simply a kind of a smash and grab, steal data, steal PII, and steal intellectual property kind of operation. But in fact, real innovation is happening today in the PRC, and they have developed. And so I think this puts that front and center, and we need to think about that. The last one I would mention is it highlights to me the critical importance of AI safety and governance. And these are the dry topics that people don't like to talk about, right? But those are the things that are going to prevent us from having, robot overlords in the future. And so we really have to think about that. If all the other things aside, if this development shows that new models can be developed rapidly and at low cost, what does that mean for the broader kind of race towards artificial general intelligence? Does that mean that that timeline collapses a little bit? If it does, that just means that getting safety and governance right is all the more urgent, and we really need to focus on that.
You popped into mind for me something, Jennifer, that was sort of an eye opener for me as well. The way that Ukraine has really innovated under pressure
Yeah.
in its war and in the
Mhm.
war that Russia launched in
Yeah.
2022. I really think that people haven't been thinking about China as innovators in that way. And so that's something new for me to think about. Thank you so
That's
much for
very
being here
parallel.
with us.
Oh, my
Jennifer
pleasure.
Ewbank,
Thank you.
former Deputy Director of CIA for Digital Innovation. It's a super long title and a very impressive one. It's so nice to be able to speak with you this morning. Thank you.
Wonderful to speak to you too, Suzanne. Thank you very much.